Hi, my name is Irene, and on this video we are going to be seeing how to produce render elevations in Revit. Now, first things first, when I'm talking about rendered elevations, I'm not talking about photorealistic renderings. That's an entirely different topic. With this, I am referring to those pretty rendered elevations that you see on proposals where it looks like a construction elevation, but it contains a lot more level of details. For example, it shows materials, it shows accessorizing. It's basically a kind of drawing that is used in interior design mostly to communicate with the client. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a construction drawing. It's more so the client better understands what they're going to be getting. So let's get to it and see how we do that. All right, Tiny Irene here on the bottom left. We're gonna be working with this bathroom proposal that I did for a different project, but you can be working with any kind of drawing. I just find that a bathroom is, small and contained enough that I can show you a lot of different techniques, but complex enough that we can see a lot of different things that we can build. So the first thing that we're going to do is create our elevated view, because right now we're in a floor plan, right? And this is the first place where you can start already elevating the quality of your design. So normally when people want to do an elevation, your immediate automatic instinct is to go with a section, right? So I draw my section here, I open it, and this is what we're working with. And it's not great. So my first recommendation is going to be instead of working with a section, what we're going to be doing is creating an interior elevation, and I'm going to show you why. So I'm going to go back to my main floor plan view, and here under the View tab, you're going to be able to find elevations. So we're going to click here, and we're going to make sure that the arrow is pointing in the direction that we want, and then depending on which version you have, it will make it an exterior or interior elevation by default. So just to be sure, make sure that you click in the little arrow, and here you can switch from building elevation, so an exterior elevation versus interior elevation. So once I have it, I'm going to open it here. And you're immediately going to see the difference. The section is cutting through the entire building. That is the purpose of a section. So for example, if you have multiple floors going on or there are adjacent rooms, you're automatically going to have that additional information to work with, whether you like it or not. While an interior elevation in Revit is programmed in such a way that it's going to detect the boundaries of the room, so floor, walls, ceilings, and it's going to frame itself so it's working just within those boundaries. So working with an interior elevation versus a section is already going to be saving you time. So that would be my recommendation. So I'm going to close here my section, and I'm actually going to delete it because we're not going to be using it. Now, coming back to my elevation, there's still work to do here. There are additional information that we don't want here, and there is information that I would like to have here. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to redraw the boundaries of this interior elevation, because you can see that on one side it's showing me the full thickness of my floor, but then it's not showing me any details of the thickness of my ceiling, and it's not showing me any details of the thickness of the walls adjacent. Now, different interior designers treat this differently. Some of them do not show thickness of floor, ceilings, walls at all. I like to show them because sometimes I will be using the thickness of my walls, for example, to introduce an additional detailing. Think of things like, for example, when you have a deep set window that you're building sitting onto, or imagine a niche in your walls for display or for your shower, those kind of detailings. So I like to show my thickness of wall when possible, and it also creates these very nice like thick rectangle that kind of like encapsulates everything very nicely. So To do that, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna click on the boundary window of my elevated view, and on my options to modify, I'm going to click on Edit Crop. And what this is going to do is basically reveal the boundary that is your view. I really like this option because this means that, for example, if you're working with a boundary that is not necessarily a nice square or rectangle like this one, you can actually pick new boundary lines to make things easier. So I'm going to be using my Align tool, quick key AL, to align my boundary to the edge of my wall and ceiling so I can see that thickness. And here it doesn't want to pick it up. That's fine. I can still pick it and move it. There you go. That's what you get for pin picking. And now with my floor, I'm actually going to reduce the thickness, because the thing is that I don't really need to know the full thickness unless you're doing something really unique, like a double double height slab or something like that. You don't really need the full thickness of your floor. So I'm just gonna drop it here, so it's more similar to what I have for my floor, for my walls and ceiling. So that looks good, and when I click OK, now we can see kind of like the boundary box of this space. So that would be the first thing. The next thing that I'm going to do is going to be change my level of detail and my viewing style. So right now it's hidden line. I want to be able to see material. So to do that, on the bottom left, on the graphic display options, we're going to change our level of detail from coarse to fine, and we're going to change our visual style from hidden frame to realistic. Oh my God, isn't she ugly?
But she is ugly. She is.
Look, don't be too harsh on Revit. Revit was never really intended to be the pretty out of the softwares. It was always the functional one. So I'm kind of pushing the boundaries of what you can do with Revit here. Now, the next thing that we're gonna be doing is getting rid of unnecessary information. In this case, we're talking about the level markers. We don't really need them for rendered elevations, so we're gonna get rid of them. To do that, we're gonna go to VG for visibility graphics, and under the annotation categories, we're going to press the letter L to quickly go to levels and turn them off and apply. Great. Now, the next thing that I like to do when I'm creating rendered elevations is I want to use my visibility graphics to overwrite the appearance of the sections of my drawing that are being cut off. In this case, the floor, walls, and ceiling. To do this, within my visibility graphics, I'm going to stay in the model category, and I'm going to go through the different areas that I want to basically black out. So for example, we're going to go to F for floor. We're gonna find our floor. Here's my floor. And what we are going to be doing is overwriting the cut section. We do not want to change the way that the finishes look on surface, so to speak, but when these elements are cut. So what I'm gonna do is on the cut, we're gonna go on pattern, override, and we're going to override it with a solid feel, and you also want to override the color, and I'm going to choose black. So I'm going to say okay, okay, and when I hit apply, see, this is what happens. Instead of showing what's happening inside of my floor, because I'm just working with a generic floor, I'm just making it a solid black rectangle, which is going to help not distracting from the main feature of my drawing, which is what's happening on the inside. Let's do the same thing with ceiling. So I'm going to go C for ceiling, find my ceiling, pattern, override, solid, and black. And finally, we are going to do, there you go. And now we're going to do the same thing with my walls. So I'm going to go W for walls, override, cut pattern to solid and black. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Awesome. Everything is awesome. So this is already looking much better, if I say so myself. Now, the other thing that I like to do, and again, this one is also optional, I like to do that also with my doors and windows, or with any other cabinetry or millwork that is being cut through. If you want to differentiate them, you could do it with either a diagonal line hatch, for example, or you could do it with a lighter gray. I just like to go with all black for uniformity, but you feel free to choose whatever you want to go for. Okay, so bringing back my VG, now I'm gonna go W for windows, and same thing, override, solid and black, okay, apply. And D for doors, same thing for all of them. Right and right and right and all right. Okay, so there is my boundary. Everything is looking much better already. There's still a lot that we can do here. Now that we have used our visibility graphic to override the elements that we're cutting through, what I want to do is clean those boundaries. So what do I mean with that? Well, the thing is that just because you're cutting, that doesn't mean that you still want to show exactly as is. For example, here, if I zoom in, you're gonna see that I have a crown mold detail, and this is an accurate representation. A crown molding detail is just like a piece of like MDF or, you know, wood or whatever that gets nailed on the wall. So this little open triangle here is accurate construction wise, but I don't really care about my client necessarily seeing these like holes and gaps in my drawing. Remember, we want the boundary to be just a nice black line that defines the space that we're showing. I don't necessarily need to see what's happening inside of it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go on my annotation tab, and I'm going to use the region fill to fill that area. So this is basically, we're not changing the model, the geometry, we're just kind of like overriding it for aesthetic purposes. So I'm gonna click here with region, and for my region options, I can create a new one. So I'm gonna go here to edit type, duplicate, always duplicate, never modify the originals, it will only bring you sadness. And I'm gonna type black fill. All right, okay. And now what I'm gonna do is for the foreground fill pattern, I am going to choose the solid one. Where is she? None. I think it's none. Oh, sorry, here, drafting, solid. And for the color, I'm gonna do the same black, and okay. And now that I have my back fill, I can just draw a little triangle here to cover this gap, and I'm going to draw another one here. See, I don't necessarily want to see these like bit of crown molding going in the wrong direction. So fill, and yes, and there you go. See, so this gives a much cleaner look to your section. And again, you could choose to do that with like the door if it's showing details that you don't want to, or whatever else. I'm gonna leave it there. All right, the next thing that we're gonna be doing is we're going to be working with the settings of my style. So instead of just staying with the default style that you're given, we are going to be basically creating our own customized style. So to do that, I'm gonna move this guy here to the side so we can see what we're doing. And again, on the bottom left on my screen, I'm gonna go under my visual style, and this time I'm gonna go on graphic display options. Now, there are a lot of options here for you to play with. My recommendation is that you go over all of them, just, you know, kind of click on a button and see what happens. It's going to be educational either way. But there are a few things that I like to work with to improve the quality and appearance of my drawings. So the first one that I'm just going to show, but we're not going to be using it for this example just because of the stuff that I'm going to be doing later, but if I wouldn't 100%, is working with shadows. Shadows really help give depth and complexity and better understanding to your drawings. So I'm gonna come here and I'm just gonna show you quickly what some of the things that you can do with shadows. So I can turn on this cast shadow and apply, and you're gonna be like, ew, that looks absolutely awful, I hate it.
Thanks, I hate it.
And that is because just turning on the shadows is not enough. You actually have to play with the settings of those shadows. To do that, after we turn our cast shadows options on, we're gonna come here under lighting and you're gonna find this option here, sun settings. Click on it and this will give you access to the sun settings, and your sun determines how your shadows are behaving. Now, because we are working with rendered elevations, this is not a solar study, and obviously the sun shouldn't be able to get into this room the way it's doing. Your shadows are serving mostly an artistic purpose. Specifically, I really like to use shadows when I have models or proposals where there's a lot of geometry that is coming in and out. Your shadows can make it a lot easier for the reader to understand who's coming out, who's going in, how far is it going out. So see, for example, here, immediately you can already see that this handle here is a recessed detail because the shadow is being casted on. So shadows are a very handy tool for that sense. But we need to make them look better. Right now they kind of look like trash. So to do that, a couple things. First of all, you do not need to work with any of these solar study options. Keep it at lighting, keep it at in-session lighting. And the most important thing is that you want to check on relative to view. Relative to view basically means that your sun is determined by the view you're currently on instead of being determined by your project north, so to speak. And then you can start playing your azimuth and altitude to determine where that shadow is hitting and how long it is. Azimuth is the position along your north, south, east, west, so to speak, and your altitude is how high your sun is. So if we would be talking about X, Y, Z, azimuth is your X and Y position of the sun, and altitude is your Z. So for example, right now I have it at 135 and 35 degrees. If I increase the value of my altitude, let's say we're gonna make it 45 and I hit apply, you're gonna see that your shadows are going to be longer. Basically, the higher the value of your altitude, the longer, the heavier your shadows are going to be on your model. The lower the value is, the lower your sun will be with respect to the model, and the less space your shadows will take, the less they will project. So if I reduce this to, let's say, 25, just for reference, and I click now, you're gonna see that your shadows start getting smaller and smaller. If I make it 5, see, your shadows are now quite short. So my sweet spot for altitude is 10, but again, this is creativity. This is your personal twist on it. So I'm gonna go with 10. Now, azimuth is a little bit trickier, especially when you're working with an elevation. In my case, first of all, I would like my shadows to be projected from this side because this is where I have a window. So even if it's not going to be accurate, I usually, if there is a window in my elevation, I like my shadows to come from wherever the window is on. So in this case, I need to basically flip my azimuth. So the number that is going to work here is going to be 190, but this is going to be project specific. So when I hit apply, see, now my shadows are coming from my window side, and see how nice it is. It helps me better understand the model depth of my objects. So I'm just going to click here, okay. And the other thing that you can use to give further depth to your model is to click on Show Ambient Shadows. And what ambient shadows do, we're going to click Apply, is they give these kind of like reflective shadow to your objects. So it's this kind of like bounce off that also helps your model better show that you have depth on it. So again, depending on what I'm working with, I will turn both of this on. I will play with the settings of my shadows, but in this case in particular, we're going to keep them off. But I just wanted to show them because I think that they are very valuable tools to, you know, spice up your model, so to speak. But in this case, I'm going to turn them off and apply. See, back to flat and boring. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my sketchy lines and enable sketchy lines. What this is going to do is give your elevation a hand-drawn feeling. And the reason that I'm using quotations is because it doesn't 100% succeed on it, but it does help make it look a little bit less like this is just like a sad digital drawing. And within it, you have two options to play with, jitter and extension. Jitter basically means that your lines are not going to be straight, and extension means that your lines will not stop when they meet. They're just gonna like go a little bit further. And once again, it's all about personal expression, but I personally don't like to get too overly aggressive. I'm gonna go pretty high on these ones just so you can see what they're actually doing. So if I click 10 on jitter, see your lines get all like, you know, you were driving on the subway or in your car while you were drawing this. On the other side, if I crank my extensions all the way up, it's gonna look like I just don't know when to quit.
Too legit to quit.
So again, it's all about one, personal style and moderation. I personally like my jitter at 1 and my extension at 2, and this gives me just the slightest amount of like, this could be maybe drawn by somebody that like is good at drawing, but it's not really fooling anyone. The next thing is coming back to my lighting section. Even though I am not working with my cast shadow and show ambient shadow on, you can still work with the lighting settings. And this can also be a very handy tool in helping your drawing show materials better. So for example, if I crank up my sun all the way up and I click apply, you're gonna see that is doing nothing. But if I come here and I crank up my ambient light, you're going to see that it's going to change the way that your materials are shown. Basically, your sun and ambient light is going to overexpose your drawing. So it's going to make the materials look a lot lighter. So what I like to do is bring these guys all the way to 0 because I want my materials to show exactly the way that I draw them. I don't want any deviancy from the original material that I'm working with. And then same thing with the shadows. The shadows, if I turn it on, is going to determine how dark your darks look. So if I crank this up and I apply, see your shadows become almost black. So whenever I'm working with shadows, what I like to do is I like to drop this guy to maybe like 10. Let me write it here. A lot easier that way. And then see, you still have your shadows, but they're not overwhelming. So always make sure that you drop your sun and ambient light to 0. And if you have shadows on, make sure that you drop the intensity of your shadows. And I'm gonna turn it off again and apply. And that's going to be basically it when it comes to graphic display options. And you can already see I still have my crappy materials, but my elevation is already looking so much better than what we started with. So to finish, I want to mention the model itself, because it doesn't matter how good your materials are, how good your your visibility graphics are, or anything else. If your model isn't good, your rendered elevation won't be good. So by that I mean that you want to make sure that when you're building your model, you make sure that it's showing all the necessary details. So for example, in my model here, you can see that I have crown molding, I have a baseboard, my door has a handle, my vanity isn't just, you know, a square with no additional information. This is going to require additional work, but it makes a huge difference on how well your final rendered elevation looks. So make sure while you're building your model that you build it with all the necessary detail. And one thing that I want to do here in particular is, for example, when I build my crown molding, these are actually two walls. So when I place the crown molding, I basically have two types of, like two crown moldings attaching to each other. So what I want to do here is this line shouldn't show, and you're gonna get that sometimes with your drawings, especially when you're joining multiple elements. If you're, for example, modeling in place, you're gonna get sometimes these little lines that you don't really wanna see in your model. So what you can do is you can go onto modify, and here under view line work, you can choose invisible lines. So you have a bunch of options here. Usually I think by default it's set up on either thin lines or just regular lines, but we're gonna check it here to invisible lines. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select each of these guys. Sometimes you're gonna have to click on that multiple times because you have multiple lines on top of each other. So I'm gonna click here, and if it doesn't change, it's fine. Click again, and there you go, it disappeared. So click, click, because again, I have like two edges of crown molding overlapping. Click, click, and there you go. Oh, I think there's one more there. Attention to detail is quite important. There you go. So see, that looks so much better. So I'm gonna wrap it up to here for this video, and in my next video, we're going to see what can we do to the god-awful default materials from Revit library. So thank you very much for joining in, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!